Thank you.
You'll have to reshare your screen, Chuck,
Yes,
because we lost it.
yes, I know.
Okay.
But Mage is here to help me. And I will reshare share the screen to the, here we go. All right. Well, welcome everyone. This has been a little passion of mine for the last several months. I have people, including my wife and a number of friends, who seem really down about the future. I mean, as Paul Hawken is fond of saying, if you look at the data, you have to be pessimistic. But if you look at all the things that are happening around the world, you got to have some it's got to inspire you to get engaged and make things happen. So I've been obsessed on this idea of how do we get there? You know, how do we get to an ecological future? How do we change from this consumer culture, which we're heavily into, even more so thanks to the advertising industry. I mean, it's just, you know, I think I said in the article something like we're like fish in the water. We're not aware of the environment because it's so pervasive. I should be able to let's see, do the
Chuck, if you click on the bottom right next to the 74%, there's the slideshow thing right to the left of 74%. Yeah, just to the left of, yes, click there.
Got it. Thank goodness for these technical people. I used to be technical.
It should give you the, if you click there, that should change it to the slideshow.
No, we're fine. We're on the slideshow now. Okay. And well, I put this in for fun. I'm also
still showing the one on the left, but anyhow, okay.
Chuck, if you click on the top left from the beginning, I think it'll show, because we're seeing the editing screen.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm seeing the actual thing, but okay.
Yeah.
So you're seeing the editing screen. So I need to stop the share and try again, or what? Okay.
Okay.
I can go up when I share this, when I share the screen and put on the slideshow. Here it is. There should be a thing where I can well,
there it is.
That's what we need, right? Okay,
yeah.
Here it is. We'll
Simply Living logo.
Well, we can go up and look at the quote from Bob Dylan. I just was amused that I did this once before, and there must be some way out of here. So the Joker to the thief, there's too much confusion. I can't get no relief. Classic Bob talk, poet. Businessmen, they drink my wine, plowmen dig my earth. None of them along the line know what any of it is worth. And somebody in a previous time when I showed that slide said, and later on and all along the Watchtower, he says that it's, oh no, I got to get the right phrase. Let us not talk falsely now. The hour is getting late. Also very appropriate for that slide. And Simply Living, I mentioned that because I think Simply Living is a community of people that are, quote, cultural creatives, and we're changing the world. And I'm going to try to make a case for that and how we might get how a path might be leading us in that direction. I was inspired by this Van Jones quote, which I don't know, I usually probably put it on my Facebook page. It's in that convergence of spiritual people becoming active and active people becoming spiritual that the hope of humanity now rests. Now, I think that, and I used to do, back before COVID, or I did a presentation on who finds their way to Simply Living. And it's really people that want to green the earth, the activists, they want to change things. And then it's also people that are, you know, Reiki 3 and do yoga and or operate yoga studios or into alternative health. And I didn't really make a big deal of this, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I believe in the very biggest picture that for the last 150 years, okay, there's been the awareness from electricity from the very beginning and all the evolution of that. Marshall McLuhan's just one point in that back in the 60s, 70s. He died in 1980. But he tapped into that concept of how we're so much influenced by the global, you invented that term, the global village. And the fact that we're aware of this big context in a way, not to judge it, you can pick away and say, well, it's a terrible global village or whatever, but just think of it in this big picture as the collective consciousness evolving. And we're not going to go in, I think I say in the article, we're not going to solve the hard problem of consciousness. But I'm very much influenced by people who are tuned in to the fact that there is kind of an evolution of consciousness, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about the next part. And I'm also a big fan of Carl Jung. A lot of people are. I think his work, and again before him, I mean Freud before him, but there's always been a reaction well before that. From people who recognize, especially in European thinkers, Henri Bergson, people who looked at the inside, even the Romantic movement, as a reaction against the industrial world and the need to look deeply as human beings. So to me, the collective consciousness meets the collective unconscious is a big picture frame to say why this could actually happen. And I think we've seen the evolution of awareness of the conscious problems and issues in the world. And I think we've got this Van Jones comparison or contrasting with, because many times people think that the New Agers or the spiritual people are somehow not tuned in to the real problems, and there's some conflict and two ends of the spectrum, so to speak. But I think they're coming together. And I was on something recently with Marianne Williamson, ran for president. That's not an accident. She put an agenda out there that is a good example of how you can combine the two. Okay, moving on. I was talking to Paul before this. This is not a very good image of Brett Weinstein and his wife, Heather Hoying, and they're doing I don't know if the title's on there, but they're doing their Dark Horse, that's the image in the middle, podcast. And they're really interesting. They're both evolutionary biologists, but Heather has a particular expertise in cultural anthropology. And the two of them did this amazing story. And I talked to Paul before he came on earlier, and they frame culture versus consciousness, a core human tension. And I put the link in the article if you want to listen to it. It's about 30 minutes of a longer discussion which is also very good. The Robert George is a brilliant guy himself who asked very intelligent questions. So it's okay. Moving on there, what we mean by that. Now, what they talk about is this, and I mentioned this in the article, this amazing story of what happened if you look at this separation of the Alaska from Siberia, the Bering Strait. So a group of people, the ancient Beringian tribe, moved to the I guess the east, okay? But the amazing story is that so 20,000 years ago, these people moved from, to form all of these cultures from 15,000 years ago, from Alaska all the way down to the tip of South America. And they amazingly created all these cultures. No, I'm getting ahead of myself. Don't want to scare you. Okay, now what made me really inspired by this thing is that they're saying the culture, okay, is the stable part. We have a consumer culture. It's stable. It's the one we're used to. It's hard to get out of it. Hard to get out from that merry-go-round. All of us in here are the cultural creatives, and we've stepped off that merry-go-round. Okay, but these people created pyramids and forms of writing, different forms. They reinvented agriculture multiple times as they had this tension a tribe would inhabit a particular area. And then some people, because of their awareness, their consciousness, there's attention, they think, well, there's another opportunity over X, Y, Z. Why don't we try that? And then, what do we need to be nomadic? We can reinvent we can invent a new culture. And the exciting thing about this conclusion of this article is that, okay, we're in this sixth extinction. I know you're not scared that we have global warming and we could blow everything up with the nuclear explosions. All these bad things can happen, right? We know this. So what they said at the end of this presentation that Hoying and Weinstein put together, they said, well, right now we have created a global culture, okay, dominated by corporate interest. We have this global culture that could be the end of things, as a la this particular slide, or it could be an opening to something new. Our consciousness, our awareness, and all of us are part of this, recognize that, hey, we can solve these problems. We just need a new culture. We need a culture of ecologically based, so that the kinds of things that seem hard to do now would just be common sense. There's only one human race, right? Why do we have to identify, black race, white race? How about just skin color or whatever, skin shade? I like to say white people are pigmentally challenged. Okay, I'll let that one sink in. Pretty good joke. Anyway, so I'm going to move it along. So the Bioneers, another group that I love, to me are the example of Kenny Ausubel, his wife, and the other woman, I can't think of her name, are kind of co-inventors of biomimicry and Bioneers and the great world, the great new ways of understanding who we are in an ecological context. I think they're just a fantastic organization. I paid full price for their conference, which was awesome. And so many, and then how great is this? They make all these great panels and presentations from their conference available for free to anybody. That's my spirit. Give it away. More love, give it away. So again, framing this tension between culture and consciousness. The creation of stable traditions is always in tension with consciousness that imagines new opportunities for change. I said in the article, fast forward to the present, well, conservatives versus progressives, and they make that comparison. It's kind of obvious, but it needs to be articulated, I think. And they see the existential crisis we face in the 20th century as either a dead end for humanity, the culture that we created, or a gateway to something not yet known. Okay, moving on, because I don't want to spend too much time. I want to get in some real fun discussion of this. This is a book published in 2000, and this is another husband and wife couple, Paul Ray and Sherry, I can't think of her last name. She's deceased. Paul's still working on a website he calls for wisdom culture. I think I don't know if I put it in the article or not, but he's the guy. They were both people who were looking at the kind of the sociology of what's going on. And the meme that I love to retell is their concept. They said, well, let's do a thought experiment. What if their idea was that this is in the year 2000 when this book came out. They thought there were about 50 million people in the United States of a time when we were probably under 300 million. 50 million people who were really not left-wing, not right-wing. The traditional religious conservatives are there. The liberals are kind of the conventional, practical people who make as Bob Dylan says, that make the squares go round. The society that we have is the one they're trying to progress in. Live the American dream. But there's more people, 50 million, they estimate, that are not either one, not left wing, right wing, not they're looking at the context of change. They tend to be green. They tend to be, well, I've already, spoiler alert, they tend to frame it much like Van Jones, people who are more tuned in, more conscious, aware. They want reform and they change. They want a green world, but they're also into alternative health and more tuned into the psychology of who they are. And their book, the thought experiment was, okay, what if all of the 50 million people that we've identified, and he did this research through SRI. This is serious research that he did over a number of years and published. And he said, what if those 50 million people were all in a cluster of Midwestern states? What would that be like? All these people with different values, not the traditional conservative or liberal or practical, not the American dream people, but the cultural creatives. He thinks that the media would think, whoa, what's going on here? It's like the size of France, like all of a sudden in the middle of the United States, the media would be all over these people saying, hey, Laurel, what's going on here? Who are you? What do you all people have these different values that would be very peculiar? But of course, it's still on the fringes, right? We're not the mainstream, and the mainstream is covering the mainstream. No judgment. That's what they do. And I thought it was just a great thought experiment, because I think the idea of putting it focused like that drives the point home that I'm trying to make in this article. So I found this guy, Zach Bell, who's an interesting guy. I'm doing this research. I did so much thinking about this, trying to make it all kind of fit together. Cultural creatives are emerging without anybody organizing their presence. They're emerging because the growth of human consciousness cannot be stopped, no matter how much today's establishments and intellectual elites try to ignore and even hide their appearance. So they're all here among and around us, 80 million cultural creatives in the United States. That's his estimate. This is like a recent thing, a year or two ago, and 120 million in Europe, all with a similar mindset, the citizens of a new world. Okay, I just threw this little collage together. I know Kat's aware that we've shown the economics of happiness film over 50 times, and it's just a great introduction to the contrast between the existing current economics of consumer society and globalization versus the economics of happiness, which is localized and full of farmers markets and unique people and yoga people and bicyclers and people that are co-creating a new civilization that's going to supplant the culture that we have. I think that, to me, and I just threw things like this in, how many people, local homesteading is so cool, right? We love to go to the farmers market, and these are the people that can do it. We just are subsidizing the big guys and not these guys. But that's going to change as we begin to make common sense decisions. Why would you poison food versus have real food? These are common sense things in an ecological context. And I just threw more things out. I've always had this fantasy of, and I just watched this movie that Santiago Rising, where we saw hundreds of thousands of people in Chile rising up against neoliberal economics. Wow. But the Pope is against neoliberal economics. He's from Argentina, right? So Pope Francis on our team. Anyway, people gathering and building community and eating food together and occupy the town square. That dream is not over, in my opinion. I love the aesthetic of this picture at the bottom there. Okay, so then part two is beyond this. And I'll quit sharing my screen for now. And we'll get back to this group. And I think I get back to okay. All right. So that's my little slideshow. I just tried to encapsulate some of the big ideas, and I'd like to get everyone's reaction. I know probably not everyone. Anna just came from a busy afternoon. She probably hasn't read the article yet, but you don't have to have read the article. The idea is to make this argument, and part one of the 4-part is to kind of frame it in a way that says, this is possible. And I think I believe that the rest of the parts or will add to that. But overall, I'd like to hear anybody's response.
I think what was interesting is a couple of things. That last part about organizing. I remember reading the history of how medical men got the right to be the childbirth kings of the United States. And what happened was, when mostly in this country, midwives were delivering children basically at home in a basic clean environment. What happened was, the reason that midwives today don't have that authority or that wherewithal is because they did not organize. What organized was the medical profession, and they actually grabbed what they didn't have, because of course it was a money-making. Women's health is always a money-making thing, because women always have some sort of problem, or they're going to have a baby, or, women's health is a sure bet to make a profit. And I think organizing is really important, which leads me to wonder, the other question I have is, I wonder, always think sometimes things start at the top. So what is our government doing? Well, who is the government? Well, I'm the government. So if I don't organize, in other words, vote, then I'm not running the government that I'm paying for. So who has the authority here? The government now seems to have the authority to take my right to vote away from me. And what can I do about that? Well, I have to get together with people like the League of Women Voters, or people that are trying to get others to vote and change the laws. I think that's a really hard tipping point. I mean, we could have a revolution, like what started our country. So it's just confounding.
I think you put your finger on and I know, Karen, you do. you are engaged and you're active in so many ways to organize and make those changes. I think in the frame of what I'm trying to argue in terms of this evolution to an ecological culture, which is basically saying it's a bottom-up kind of revolution, right? Things that are happening in the different areas, like local food is probably the best and easiest example of where we have a real bottom-up tendency, young people becoming farmers and people becoming homesteaders and putting solar panels and advocating for.
But as you pointed out, who is the government subsidizing? The government that we're paying for is subsidizing factory farms.
That's right.
Not small farms.
So we need to look at the global corporate system that we have in place. It's like the last empire, right? If you think of all these cultures, we've also had cultures that developed empires. The Inca Empire, and there's the Aztecs, but that was just from the Beringian branch. That we've had, the history of of Western civilization, Eastern Asian civilizations. We've had all kinds of empires, and we've still got them. Right now, we're talking about who has a sphere of influence in Ukraine. It's crazy stuff, but we haven't. So we're still living in a situation where we have the top down controlling our democracy. They fund the politicians. It's pretty straightforward. We don't have the I think it's the 28th Amendment that says money is not speech and corporations are not people, move to
Right.
amend.
Right.
That's common sense, right? But it's a slow process. Just to get this plug-in for Meghna Chakrabarty doing a whole week on monopoly power. And we've got some pretty smart people paying attention for the first time in a long time. I think the last big effort, the Congress went after Bill Gates and Microsoft. And they're talking about it with the big tech organizations now. And before that, it was the baby bells or the oil, the Standard Oil. We broke them up, and they ended up being Exxon and Shell, Chevron. So we have this problem of corporate power, and I'm arguing, I guess, in my frame, that we're going to have to get enough cultural creatives to influence. So in other words, we need a younger Bernie Sanders. We need many more of the squad folks that are now in Congress, and we're getting them. We've got organizations that are working in that direction, but I agree. It's an organizational issue, but we're organizing largely from the bottom up. But there are policies that can make a huge difference. I'm also a big fan of public banking and the modern money theory. I think I don't want to go too much far. I'll say one thing because I'm writing an article, revising an article about Robert Hockett has been working with the public bank people, and he's a former Federal Reserve officer. He writes for Forbes. He's an attorney and a professor at Cornell, but he's also tuned into these policy issues around money. And he points out that what Joe Biden is doing right now with Build Back Better and these $1 trillion things that are scaring people about how you're going to pay for it. Well, modern money theory has the answer to that, and we're pretty close to that. Stephanie Kelton is the guru of I don't want to say that the MMT is the only answer. I want ecological economics. Not all MMT people are ecologists, but they have the opportunity. They have the fiscal piece that can, and they know how to manage it to avoid inflation, I'm convinced. So if we were able to, Stephanie Kelton thinks that about 30% of the people that are in the high level positions around the Federal Reserve are way open to this MMT approach to fiscal policy. And Robert Hockett actually calls quantitative easing, which we did with George W. Bush when we bailed out the 2008 bankers and the financial institutions, what they call that quantitative easing, QE, to bail out the banks. Robert Hockett says what Biden is doing is community QE. We can actually invest in our people. We can pass laws that fully fund Head Start, all these good programs we have. We can fully fund, anyway, you get the idea. We can begin investing our financial resources in people. And we can do that by making sure that what we invest in can actually happen. And we can talk about more of that later. I'll probably do another webinar on MMT. Okay, other thoughts? Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so when you talk about culture of, would you say, or developing ecological culture, I think there are other cultural aspects that have to go along with that. Like in America, individualism is seen as such a big deal. Well, we need to change that to a culture of cooperation and for the general good, because we all do better when we all do better. And so it's not like a zero-sum game, that the powers that be want us to think there. And I think that again, has to be a strong question of capitalism. Capitalism puts a price tag and makes everything a commodity. That's its worth. And we cannot have the things that we want as long as that's in place, in my opinion, there. And other things, our culture of worshiping our Constitution as if it's got all the greatest things in it. We need to question, could these so-called founding fathers ever imagine climate change? Could they ever imagine the kind of weapons we have? Could they ever imagine all of these things that we're experiencing? No, of course not. So, that's another cultural thing that I see has to change. And a big cultural thing that will lead us on the way, I think, to an ecological culture is and it's growing throughout the world, the more and more acceptance and eventually working its ways into our laws of rights of nature. It's already worked its ways into Colombia and Ecuador, and they've already used it successfully to stop some damning projects because they said it's going to damage some logging projects or other ones damage the river, which ultimately damages us, and we're not separate from nature. And so that's the rights of nature movement is a big thing that will help us get there, I think.
Totally agree. Kat, you might want to comment on the distinction between capitalism and the markets. David Corton has made a very useful distinction there. You want to comment on that a little bit? You got to unmute though.
I don't know that I could do it justice, Chuck, but clearly capitalism is destructive, in a word. And I think we have yet to realize the damage it actually does. And, David talks about the new economy, and it's so different from what we know, what we've ingrained, what is embedded in our society in terms of capitalism. And it has to do with the individualism. It has to do with more. It's always what we aspire to rather than feeling grateful for what we have and the resources that are local, rather than trying to grab them from someplace else, whether it's, the next state over or someplace around the world. Thinking about avocados these days and the conflict in Mexico. Oh my goodness. The farmers carrying around AK, whatever those guns are to protect their fields from the cartel. I mean, all in search of money, it's all about greed. Capitalism, I mean, that's the first word that comes to my mind when I think about capitalism. It's greed.
Well, I think one thing that they forget is that no matter how hard you try, you can't eat money.
This is true.
Yeah.
These are all great points. Paul, you want to comment on this? I know you have opinions about
I see Farrell had his hand up, so I'll pass it to
okay,
you.
I can't see everybody's list. I gotta get.
Yeah, it's all right.
I got another
Well,
person coming in here too.
Actually, I had a little trivia thing for everyone. You get 10 ecological points if you can identify the person who said the following. Okay, we are like tenant farmers chopping down the fence around our house for fuel when we should be using nature's inexhaustible sources of energy, sun, wind, and tide. I'd put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that.
Wasn't that a Supreme Court justice who said that?
Well, no,
Oh,
maybe he did, but anybody else?
I'm gonna vote for Thomas Edison.
Oh, who said that?
Chuck.
It was.
I'm a
It
big-
was Thomas Edison.
I was muted. Yeah, Chuck and I, yeah, I heard that. I saw that.
Did you? All right. He died in 1931, Thomas Edison. So yeah, okay.
Yeah,
That's all. That was my little
that's great.
trivia point tonight.
And
I saw that in conjunction with a salt box, completely passive solar house built on the Cape in the 1940s.
yeah, wow.
With
Well,
all due respect to Mr. Edison, when I get in one of my moods and I'm thinking way beyond, I love that you bring us back to 22,000 years ago, Chuck, because in the history of time, we are but a speck. But when I think about solar and wind and tidal energy, I can't help but think, what are we doing to these systems when we put out these big rigs in the middle of the ocean? We're interrupting the currents, we're interrupting the natural flow of that water. What's that doing to the marine life? When I think about wind, we're also interrupting the currents of the wind, of the atmosphere. And I don't like to go there, but when I think of a unlimited time frame, when we look back 100 years from now, and we've done all the solar and the wind and the tidal energy, what will that have done to the natural systems? Rhetorical question.
yeah.
I'm going to have to scoot here in a moment, but I did put in the chat a little interview I did with Professor Susan Krumdijk, who is now the academic chair at the Island Center for Net Zero in Orkney Island. Her job is to work with about, I think the British government has put 350 million pounds into the effort, and working through Harriet Watt University to see if it really can be done. And Susan is a preternaturally capable professor of mechanical engineering. And so I think it's a pretty decent little interview. And then I would highly recommend everyone buy that book, Transition Engineering. It takes a little bit to get through it. But her thesis is that if we think about just a solar powered or wind powered or tidal powered or any kind of powered version of what we got, it's a loser. So the only way you can actually do this is to separate the essential from the non-essential. We can build systems that meet essential needs, at least we believe we can, within the ecological boundaries, the climate safe version and all of that. But we can't, as long as we have, in essence, a deranged culture that values the wrong thing. Or as Professor John Eckert, great ag economist, said, not everything that's valuable can be denominated in dollars. In fact, the most valuable things are not denominated in dollars. The other concept that Susan has in that book, which is really a provocative one, said the health of every culture is based on the EROI, energy ROI. And the health of any culture is based on the delta between the energy consumed and the energy required to make the energy that you consume. That if the delta is at a certain level over a certain number, she has all the technical stuff in there, then you have inherently a healthy culture. If not, you have a culture of extinction. And she said, unfortunately, a solar, wind, and tidal powered version of incumbent system is a culture of extinction. Can't happen. It can't happen thermodynamically. So I would, I think you'll find the interview entertaining, and the book really enlightening. It completely changed my perception. We're kind of shooting we're shooting at the wrong target by looking at things like renewable energy by itself. We have to look at all of the processes, and I'm preaching to the choir, but we have to look at everything if everything's going to work.
Yeah. I just want to agree that you have to look at from cradle to grave, the extraction process and everything, and like to get the lithium and other things. Not to say that we should just continue with oil and gas either, but one of the things the choir is just talking about green energy, but it's like there should be a conversation about reducing energy consumption too, to needs like you mentioned, not just about, using technology so that big corporate interests can exploit it and make money off it, which they're already doing, to go and create some giant mine somewhere, which they're trying to do in Nevada, create the largest lithium mine in the US and destroy the habitat there for batteries and all, for electric vehicles and things like that. So, and just look at Columbus with our chip facility, which everybody is talking about, jobs. Well, not only they use an incredible amount of water, like 5 million gallons a day or more, but there's a lot of toxic waste created too with that. And so we should question, why is it that things are created that we have to replace them every 5 years now, the planned obsolescence, like phones, computers, and all that, that we need so many chips for that? So that just creates the endless production of more, which leads to ultimate destruction, I think. So.
Folks, thank you very much. I appreciate the discussion, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Bob. Anna has her hand up.
I think Laurel's hand was up first.
Oh, no, I was just saying goodbye.
Oh,
Good.
Yeah, thank you.
It's 10 o'clock, and respect people's time. I'll stay as long as people want to chat, but thanks for coming, and bye, Laurel.
No, I was just saying goodbye to the guy. Who was just
To
talking.
Bob.
Oh.
Okay, great. All
Yeah,
right, you're
thank
gonna
you,
hang
Bob.
in. Okay,
Sorry.
Anna, you're up.
I was gonna say that I really think that like my generation is kind of like waking up and taking notice of how toxic the current state of America is with capitalism and our reliance on buying new things like every single month or every single year. I think the main problem that especially like college students are having is those sustainable options aren't feasible or accessible to us because they're more expensive. So if you go to the grocery store, the organic fruits and vegetables are usually a lot more expensive. And so we want to be better. We want to do these things to make the world a better place, but it's not financially an option for us. Or if it is, we feel kind of like hopeless. Like, oh, what's me buying like organic vegetables at the grocery store today gonna be in the long run? Like, I'm not making a difference. And I think we really need to work on making sure that with like the grassroots organization, we're making sure that each generation is getting involved, because I really feel like as someone who's interested in this field, I feel like there's not a lot of other people my age, or it could just be the organizations I'm getting involved with. And I really feel like there would be so many other people interested, and they just don't know that this exists. And so it's like somehow getting communicating with those individuals like, hey, like we're here, we think the same thing that you do, and let's make this feasible. And I think an interesting connection between like the grassroots and I know like the government was mentioned earlier is, I know a big problem that Ohio's been having right now is redlining and getting those maps redrawn to make sure that our voices do count. Because with the redlining, yeah, Clintonville can vote and we can say we want all of these conservation things. But with us being in the district that we are, will that be the majority? Even though I think that Central Ohio does have the majority and does want more conservation issues. So I think it's a really interesting connection between getting people involved, because I think that they do care about the environment, while also making it like accessible, feasible, and making sure that they think that what they do matters, because it does.
Yeah, I think maybe I would reframe the choice for the organic vegetables. Doesn't make a big difference in the short run, but in the long run, it will. We've had a huge increase in the number of farmers markets. There's a real movement for the local food folks, the Organic Consumers Association or Society, whatever they are. Again, they're not the mainstream. Most food, meat and vegetables are produced with industrial agriculture. Quick plug for part 2. We'll explore in more depth why the culture of separation and thinking that we can do whatever we want to the environment without having it bite us. And but yeah, I think you're right that so many young people are interested and feel like they've been. I'm sad to see that a lot of times the boomers are kind of blamed, which deservedly so in many ways. No question about it. I'm older than the boomers, but I've been married to 3 boomers, so I feel like I know the boomer psychology. But we're boomers that care, but we're a minority. It's this is many people who were maybe younger, your age, ended up finding the opportunities that were there, and they were working for corporations, they were working for big organizations that were participating in this. Population is another issue that we've ignored. That's and as several people have pointed out, we don't want a future of everybody having an EV and everybody having corporate produced green products. That's not going to change anything.
Well, the way I see it is if, people would like some instant gratification when they do something good. And I agree with you. Every time I buy something and spend more money on organic, I think, oh God, what kind of a difference am I making? Well, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to do it because in the long run, it's going to be great. But wouldn't it be nice if I checked out, I would get 25% off on my organic products because I went organic, and the government thinks this is a great idea, and I'm going to be subsidized rather than a factory farm. I'm going to be subsidized for doing the good for everybody and myself and the world. There's no instant gratification, and people do like to see that, and I think it's a problem because you have to talk yourself into being gratified. And it's hard work.
It's a problem. We have a new person, Deb. Glad you could join us. Came in a little late, but if you want to unmute and introduce yourself, welcome.
Thank you. Deb McGuire. Sorry, I had to work.
Yeah, some people still have to do that, the day job.
Glad to be here, though.
Okay, great. Paul, okay, Maida's got her hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I as I was listening to Anna talking about her frustration of how it's always costing more to be more ecological, we came to ecological thinking. Well, we were thinking about, my husband and I, we wanted to get back to the land, but we were very poor. And we live in East Linden. We were living in Linden, and for the last 12 years or something, we started out very poor and wanted to get back to the land and couldn't think of a way that we could farm. And Chuck will know this because he's known us long enough that we had a lot of struggles trying to get a little piece of land, and we managed to go an alternative route rather than buying a farm that we could never afford out in the country. We're in East Linden, and we cobbled together. We found a property that was horrible. The house was in horrible shape, and the owner, she had to give it away practically. We cobbled together, family, friends, did a crowdfunding campaign, and cobbled together enough money. It was $25,000, and it was 4 acres attached to the house. That was, a nightmare, but that was the 4 acres we were interested in. And then the lot next door was an abandoned house. And after, we kind of got our footing under the 4 acres there, we're still working on that house, by the way. We called the land bank because the lot next door was 2 acres and it was abandoned. And of course, these are properties nobody would touch with a 10-foot pole. But we saw the value that was the land. It was all wooded, mostly, and did a crowdfunding again and managed to cobble together. And of course, there are choices you make in order to get these little pieces of land. I'd never buy shoes, no handbags, no fancy curtain rods, anything that you would see in a normal household. We would pass on. We have a conversation that every piece of furniture in our house has either been out of a dumpster or passed down from a family member. And so we managed to get our little piece of land. We now have 6 acres in East Linden, and we're working on the house still to get it moved in. But last year, my husband raised maybe 40 or 50 chickens, and we have them in the freezer now. We've been eating them all winter long, and those were raised organically, not strictly organic, but they're on the land and by ourselves, so we know they're wholesome. And that's one way to do that kind of thing. I mean, of course, it's a big path. It's a long road to get there. But there are ways to get around the fact that organics are more expensive in the grocery store. You can find a community garden, find a local farmer, and sometimes you can. It's not the easiest route, but you can find ways to get around the system. And that's, I guess, the moral of the story.
Maida is the ultimate simple. I can tell you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, are you familiar with Free Cycle?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. We've for many years. Yeah. But yeah, we managed to find there are little apps on the phone where you can, if you really need to go pick up stuff on the curb, that you can get all kinds of stuff that are perfectly usable.
So it's not just couch surfing, it's dumpster surfing.
Dumpster diving is a beautiful thing.
Okay.
We don't do it much anymore.
Yeah, well, and not that Maida's story is a typical story. It isn't, but there's
no, we're fringe.
It's a lot of people though who are moving in those directions, and all over the world. And I wanted to comment briefly on I think Bill made the point about individualism, and it's kind of a two-edged sword. If you think about the people who are influenced by the super individualism, I certainly agree that we need to work, we need to build community, we need to cooperate, we need to collaborate, we need to make that real in our lives in ways. But the United States is kind of the epitome of this kind of attempt, successful in various degrees or not. And the pop culture that we've created is inspiring people in Santiago. They're inspired in Taiwan. They're in Hong Kong, and in Ukraine, and in Estonia, and places where people really are rallying for democracy, and they haven't experienced it, but they know, and this is true of China. China ruled by a dictator, terrible things. Same for Russia. Look at that guy, that brave guy that they poisoned, still haven't been able to kill him. That's that's real bravery that people are standing up for democracy. And a lot of that comes from, a lot of the reason that the Soviet Union broke up was the Beatles. I'm serious. You can really make a case for the fact that pop culture has influenced the young people all over the world, and the football boomers might not have appreciated the hip hop and the rap on the Super Bowl, but it's influencing every culture. It's in Indonesia. I mean, it's everywhere, and it's that amazing energy that comes from the music and the rhythms of people expressing themselves that I think also plays a role in building community in a backwards kind of way. Just my thought. Other ideas, comments? It is 8:15. In theory, it was going to be 8:15. You know, I do want to honor people's time. I also, but you know, I'll stay as long as people want to chat. But
Chuck, Laurel's had her hand up for quite a while.
Oh.
All right.
Well, I was just going to say in reference to, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just going to say in reference to food, I tell people I spend money on my food instead of co-pays. People have no idea. I mean, most of you folks probably do know that Roundup is sprayed on 160 different crops, and just how it deteriorates our health. And I think if we had Medicare for all, then we would definitely have Roundup would definitely be banned, because they would just see how it's degrading the health of the proletariat, and that getting rid of it, we'd be much healthier and wouldn't be spending all that money on medical expenses. So that's what I had to say.
A woman. I think that's so true. And I can't see everybody's, and Laurel was off my screen, so I couldn't see your hand up, sorry. And feel free to just jump in, unmute yourself, unless you have some weird noise in your background.
Well, I just wonder, I think that you might forget it, how many people are making money because people are sick. And I just wonder how much bigger does Children's Hospital have to get before they can service all our sick children? I'm sick about it.
Yeah, we have a medical system that is again, I'm a big fan of On Point and Megan at Soccer Party, but she had a person on there who's written a book on, you know, how the medical system has not been effective in dealing with the pandemic, or essentially arguing that it's partly it's the airline seats model. You know, they have a system of you know, charging for everything, and beds are the most expensive one. But the airline seat model is to be efficient, just like corporations. You want to, you want to estimate from an algorithm how many beds you're going to need to make a profit. And the profit margin is not that high because of the expenses of the system, which are also built into the charging for every procedure. So there's a bias in the medical system to charge for every, you know, for entering, you know, you got to pay a fee to get the intake process. You have to pay a fee for the x-ray. You have to pay. My brother had early onset Alzheimer's, and he fell down, and he had one of those things on his watch that triggered right away the medical alert. They came in, they got him, they did what they're supposed to do. They brought him to the hospital. And, you know, I got called because I went over there as quick as I could. I stayed with him for several hours, and the whole thing was maybe 5 hours. And of course, I knew right away that he was fine. That he, and at the end of it, but he's all wired up with every possible thing that could possibly be wrong, which is, I understand why they do that. But so $9,000 later, you know, he spent that 5 hours in the emergency and getting into the into a hospital bed. And I know why they do that, but at the end of the 5 hours, they're taking all the wires and stuff that he's being monitored on, and the IVs, and my brother shows when he fell down, it was on the sidewalk, and he scuffed his elbow, and the nurse says, "Oh my goodness!" And so before he left, they put a bandage on. Probably another few $100 to get and it's not really funny, but it was amusing in hindsight, and he would have that sense of humor too. It's pretty crazy. But the medical system is also an example of the same kind of thinking that allows us to be able to make decisions. You know, I've had heart disease since 1983. That's half my life. And I remember going into my cardiologist after I said, looks to me from the research I've done that I can just make some basic changes and overcome this thing, you know, by lifestyle, quit smoking, which I smoked for 23 years. I quit smoking, quit eating greasy food and pizza and beer, and watch my stress, get exercise, and I'm here half my life later. But and that's true of all of these, you know, it's true of, we now understand from the wellness health, alternative health movement, that we're not machines, that you know, they were going to put a stent in my occlusion in my right coronary artery. It was at greater than 90% occlusion. They couldn't do it because they couldn't get the needle in there without risking puncturing an artery wall, whatever. This is a long time ago. But that's what they do. They want to fix the problem, right? And pharmaceuticals, same thing, a pill for every ill. They don't look at the larger context. And I'll be talking in part 3 about everything is now happening in an ecological context. You can't see it as something separate. It's everything, every action has a context. And so health and wellness is simply friends still. But just making progress. And, you know, there's a lot of people, because it's true, by the way, of cancer. You know, my second wife died of cancer. But she lived for 12 and a half years without doing any of the surgeon, the oncologist used to say, well, Ann, you're here to tell me you're not going to do what I'm going to recommend, because it's just a formula. They look it up, they see a particular kind of cancer it is, and they recommend chemo and radiation. Well, she didn't want to do that. And the thing that people don't realize is that she had pretty good life those 12 and a half years with none of the suffering of chemo and radiation. But most people are not aware of that for the same reason that they're not aware of the this movement of the creative cultural creatives that are trying to co-create a new path forward, an ecological path.
On the topic of cancer, you know, I appreciate that President Biden, even before, when he was vice president, he was looking for a cure for cancer. That was his big area of focus. What would it look like if not instead of, because I think we do need to find cures and help people who have cancer. Why don't we also look at the root cause of cancer? Like the pesticides, the toxins in our environment, in our soil. Because guess what? If people are healthy, we don't need the pharmaceuticals. Exactly. And our healthcare costs will go down. And the other in parallel, isn't it ironic that, you know, we pull out of Afghanistan because we're going to be done with that war. And here comes another one. Who's benefiting? The arms dealers, the military industrial complex, whether it be Russia or United States or NATO or anybody, but what is that? Oh, what's it doing for you? Well, what's it doing for us is the corporations are making more and more and more money, and the GDP is going up because every one of those products is a plus on the GDP. And that is a horrible, horrible measure of how well our society is.
Unwell.
Unwell, yes.
Unwell.
Yeah, well, there's capitalism again. Just one thing that I pulled up that Terry Lodge, who's an attorney who not only works for Deaf Community Rights and us, but also in the anti-nuclear thing. And there was an article that said Raytheon CEO Greg Hayes, I'll just read it. It's just a paragraph here, took a cruder approach, appearing to celebrate a potential war over Ukraine and Houthi drone attacks on the UAE as good indicators for future weapon sales, responding to an analyst's question about increased demand for weapons from international countries, just given the rising tensions. And here's the quote. It says, "We are seeing, I would say, opportunities for international sales. We just have to look to last week where we saw the drone attack in the UAE, which have pressured some of their other facilities. And of course, the tensions in Eastern Europe, the tensions in the South China Sea, all those things are putting pressure on some of the defense spending over there. So I fully expect we're going to see some benefit from this." Yeah, so we
And
talk about what's wrong with our system. Yeah, there you go.
The GDP goes up, yeah.
Yeah, money for human destruction. Yeah.
I just saw a statistic that I think maybe this was from I blame everything on Magna, but there's something, I think there's like four arms dealers that are making all the money. And there used to be like tens of thousands, but they she did one in the meat industry. Keith Ellison uses the term monopoly capitalism. He says, I'm not against capitalism or the markets, but I am against monopoly capitalism. And I think people are waking up to the fact that across even Republicans, there are some who recognize that no, monopolies are not a good thing. And since Reagan, as Tom Hartman points out repeatedly, there's no there's no reinforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act. So we need to start paying attention and breaking up these monopolies.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a logical conclusion of how it's going to go myself, because it's a dream to think we're going to have some kind of fair market with capitalism. I really, because they have the ones who have the power and the money to influence the laws and the rules and regulations are going to make it benefit them. And that's what's happened. But I was just one last point, and then I'll have to go. That's like, we have to get not just the idea of social media, but artificial intelligence and how that is using and dividing our society, and how we're like the what was the film? It was a recent film, very powerful film. You probably know what I'm talking about. It talks about this idea of artificial intelligence just feeding people more and more of keeping them engaged and getting them more and more not seeing the truth, but into what they want to see. And what was that film called? It escapes me right now, but very powerful film there about that. And so that is become so strong and social media and people and dividing us, because it's just making people just feeding into their own thinking and not trying to look for the truth, just reinforcing what they already believe. And that's a very dangerous thing. And so social dilemma. The social dilemma. If you haven't seen that, you should see that. Yeah. Very powerful. Yeah. Well, Facebook, you talked about the woman who testified. I mean, you can talk about the woman who testified about it. And so that's what they all do, what Facebook did. So it's no surprise.
Well, are you referring to the whistleblower? I thought she did it.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So, this is pretty well established. There are people who are in the field itself. One of my mentors is a guy named Bob Logan, who's a media ecology guy, and he's a physicist background, but he has written about the problems of thinking, the skewed thinking of people who embrace artificial intelligence as the future. Silicon life, no difference between that and carbon-based life. He has some great essays on that. And Jaron Lanier, who invented the term virtual reality, is also now on the team. What another guy I'm a fan of, Douglas Rushkoff. He is a guy who is an early digital media theorist, and one of our Simply Living book clubs was on his book called Team Human, which he now puts out there. I think the whole thing's available as a PDF. It's not a huge book, but it's very good at deconstructing the ways in which we're addicted to the media environment, and how corporations have just hijacked it. Right. This has been true since McLuhan first looked at TV. Television is this amazing medium, but we get free. We made a devil's bargain, right? Free media, as long as you hear commercials on every program. So and they've done the same thing with the internet, which is very disappointing to those of us who were very excited, like Douglas Rushkoff, when we're going to democratize things. We're going to make the internet, work for everybody, local as well as global internet world, which we can still do, but we have to, again, it's a challenge to get it done. You want to say something, Maida?
Yeah, I think one hope for cultural change, and you mentioned the internet democratizing things, is a lot of journalism. There's been a shift that I've been watching, a shift toward independent media by some younger audiences, people gravitating towards podcasts and YouTube channels, and subscriber-funded journalists that use alternative media. So it's those alternative medias that aren't dependent on corporate ads or corporate support.
Right.
So they're free to report on things that don't get any coverage in mainstream media. And so they threaten the power of corporations because they could say things that mainstream media will leave on the cutting room floor, if you will. And so that's very hopeful that independent media is a good voice for cultural change. And another hopeful thing that I've seen is this great resignation, what they call it, people waking up after having a nice long pause during the pandemic and having time to think over their work-life balance, and saying, what's really important, thinking what's really important. And we've seen also a resurgence in pro-union sentiment. A lot of the pro-unionization movements that we've seen with Starbucks in Buffalo and other ones now taking off is another cause for having some hope that the cultures are shifting. And they're very small still, but it's gaining momentum.
That might be the note to end on, since it's already 8:30. But I appreciate everybody coming. If anybody wants to add the last word, they can before I hit the record button again to end it. But I thank everybody for coming. It's been a fun conversation. I'm seeing waves, and I appreciate everybody's input. And I hope you'll tune in on part 2, 3, and 4, as that's kind of a progression. I worked hard to make it a logical progression with some, and so each time I just plan to unpack some of the ideas in the article and share, get conversations, input, and I appreciate everybody paying attention to my thing that I have such a passion for. Okay, well, thank you all, and have a good rest of the evening. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That was great. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Tammy. Take care.